Visualization is a graphical representation of information. You use it for charts, tables, graphs, maps, infographics, or dashboards. There's actually a way of building dashboards using Python as well. Just some interesting information. One advantage is that when you do graphing, you can understand trends and outliers and patterns in the data at a glance. So the case study that we're doing is a banking crisis in Africa. So it focuses on visualizing trends in the banking crisis, specifically banking debt, the financial sector, inflation, and also the systemic crises. I'll explain what some of those mean soon. So the data is from 1860 to 2014. Wow. In 13 African countries, including Algeria, Angola, Central African Republic, Cote d'Ivoire, Egypt, and so forth. The data was collected over many years. I wonder how they collected data from 1860. It must have been crazy. And there's a link of where or how you can access the data. So let me just first load this data, and then we can go to which columns we're interested in. Okay, so let's just open the data and then just see what columns we have. So remember, here is to see the top 5 rows in the data set. Okay, so we have code, CC3, country, year, was there banking crisis nodes, was there systemic crisis, and other columns. So the columns that we're interested in is the case, CCR, country year, banking crisis. No crisis means that there was no crisis in that year, and crisis means there was a banking crisis in that year. And systemic crisis, 0 means there was no systemic crisis, and 1 means that there was. And then exchange rate is usually USD. That's number 7. Number 8, domestic debt in default. 0 means that no domestic debt default occurred. 1 means that there was domestic default. I think a lot of this is jargon unless you understand the background of the source of the data. But we do understand the banking crisis, systemic crisis, country year.
So I guess that's load shedding.
Sorry?
Yes, that's load shedding.
In action, it's even on tape. Someone's recording this. Okay, let me go back. Okay. You guys just let me know if you stop hearing me or there's connection issues. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Okay, so the context of the problem statement, it's knowing what you want to communicate in the first step of the data visualization. So when you get in contact with a data set, you want to know beforehand what it is that you want to get out of it. So that's your problem statement. And you will also just go through the data and see how you can answer your question. So data is your message should guide the data that you decide to illustrate, like I just mentioned. And it should be done in a way, well, it's interesting to be done in a way where you're telling a story about the data and it becomes engaging. Dashboarding is a good way of telling a story out of data that you have. The audience, if you understand your audience, it'll as sometimes you have a technical audience. So when you have a technical audience who understand the depth of data, the depth of algorithms you may use, and so forth, then you'll know how to make your visuals. But if it's just general layman, you will just give it simpler visuals, which get to the point easier. Oh, yeah, so it's just about the audience, the data size, just to know how many illustrations that you want to put. There shouldn't be too much so that the audience can't interpret at a glance, but the data shouldn't be so small that it gives an incorrect representation of the population. So with the data that we have now, we'll see some of the factors that are associated with banking crises. So to come up with a context that will relate to, we can sort of apply this banking crisis to our current situation, and obviously that's the pandemic. So the questions we can think of while coming up with the context during the pandemic: does the financial situation of a country get affected? If yes, how does it get affected? And does this directly then lead to a banking crisis? And are we able to predict this? That would be interesting to find out. So let's start off with some questions just to wrap our heads around the problem statement and what is required. So some questions that may guide us is, does a systematic crisis have an impact on the banking crisis? Systematic crisis is the pandemic in this situation. Does that influence the banking sector, the banking crisis? When a country is experiencing a currency crisis, does that correlate or convert to a banking crisis? How was the exchange rate fared? How has it fared over the years, especially in these current pandemic times? Does the inflation directly lead to a banking crisis? So let's see if we can answer these questions as we go along. Any questions so far? Any terms that you may have not understood? All right. You guys can still hear me, right?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I think we're going to make it. Cool. So data exploration. So usually in your mind, whenever you get a data set, the first thing you should want to do is explore it, right? Because you're not going to know from the get-go what's in it. You want to see if there are if you do have a predetermined problem statement or questions to answer, you want to see how that your data can help you, and maybe it can even give you more information than you even thought that you needed. So yeah, data exploration is your go-to whenever you get a data set. This is what you do. Okay, so let's get a better understanding about data. Data.describe just tells you about, it gives you a summary based on stats. It will look at the numeric columns that you have, and also it'll do just counts for the other columns that are not numeric. So like a count for the number of cases here, you'll know that you have around 15,000. So that's around 15,000. That's how big the data set is. For the year, what's interesting, you can see the mean of the year is 1908, and that's crazy. You can see a minimum is 1800, so that's how far back the data goes. Maximum is 2016. 75% of the data comes from 1962, so you can see such things. It really helps you. And also, when you do a data.describe, it helps you see if there are any outliers